My husband said I was only half the woman. His ex-wife was. My response shocked him completely. If you believe no woman should ever be compared to an ex or made to feel less than in her own home, please consider subscribing. It's free and it helps this story reach others who need to hear it. Now let me tell you exactly what I did next. I am Lauren Matthews. The story began 8 years ago in the small coastal town of Millfield, where I first met George Harrison at a community fundraising event for the local children's hospital. George was a handsome, well-spoken man in his 30s, carrying the calm confidence of someone who had been through major storms and come out stronger on the other side. I was immediately drawn to him, not just because of his good looks or his successful career as a regional sales director for a medical equipment company, but because of the way he spoke about his two small children with clear love and fierce devotion. George's first wife, Vanessa, had left him for another man 3 years earlier, leaving him alone to raise 6-year-old Jack and 4-year-old Emma. The tragedy was etched into him. His eyes still held a deep sadness that spoke of immense loss. But within that sadness was also an unusual strength that I found both moving and magnetic. This was a man who had faced the worst thing a father could endure, and somehow found the strength to keep building a life for his children. At that time, I was 28 years old, working as a nurse at the same children's hospital where the fundraiser was held. I had always been drawn to caring for others, both in my career and in my personal relationships, and I was deeply moved by George's story and the obvious devotion he had for his children. Our first conversation lasted nearly 2 hours, covering everything from our shared love of hiking to our similar values about family responsibility. Our relationship moved slowly because from the very beginning, George made it clear that his children would always come first, and that any woman in his life, any woman who stayed by his side, would have to understand and accept that reality. I not only accepted it, I fully embraced it. I had always dreamed of having a family, and the chance to be a mother to Jack and Emma while building a new life with George felt like a gift rather than a burden. The next 3 years of dating were marked by careful blending and genuine bonding. I spent countless afternoons and weekends with George and the children, attending soccer games and school plays, helping with homework, and slowly becoming not just George's girlfriend, but a real mother figure in the daily lives of Jack and Emma. The children, who were naturally wary of any woman who might replace the mother they loved. Jack, who was 6 when his mother left, was old enough to clearly remember Vanessa and was initially the more cautious of the two. He tested my patience and my commitment in the way grieving children often do, sometimes pushing boundaries or comparing me to the mother he had lost. But I stayed steady, and through my genuine interest in his love for baseball and science fiction, along with my patient understanding of his need to work through his pain, I slowly won him over. Emma, younger and more open, welcomed my presence in her life with the wholehearted enthusiasm that only a child can bring to new relationships. Within the first year, she began calling me Mom, a change that filled me with both joy and fear, because I understood the heavy responsibility that title carries. George's reaction to this change was completely positive. He saw it as proof that his children were healing and that their small family was becoming whole again. The wedding, when it finally took place, was held simply with the presence of close family and friends. George insisted on keeping everything modest, partly for financial reasons, but mainly because he felt that an elaborate ceremony would be disrespectful to the memory of his ex-wife. At that time, I was still wrapped in happiness, and I completely agreed. I had always believed that marriage was about building a solid, loving home for the children, rather than making a social statement or indulging romantic fantasies. The early years of our marriage unfolded exactly as I had hoped, even more so. I officially adopted Jack and Emma, a legal procedure that felt like the most natural thing in the world, but also a deep commitment to truly becoming their mother in every sense of the word. When I became pregnant with Mason 2 years after the wedding, the whole family shared the joy. Jack and Emma were thrilled at the thought of becoming big siblings, and George seemed genuinely happy that our family was growing. Mason's birth brought a new kind of happiness into our family. He was healthy and beautiful, with George's jet black hair and Lauren's green eyes, and his arrival seemed to complete the family circle that had begun when Lauren entered their lives. Jack and Emma loved their little brother with the special tenderness that older siblings often show, and George proved himself to be a loving and attentive father to his newborn son while still maintaining close bonds with his older children. During 4 happy years, our family life became the realization of everything I had dreamed of. We lived in a comfortable suburban home with a wide backyard where the children could play, took family vacations to nearby beaches and mountains, and built daily routines that brought safety and happiness to the kids. George was a devoted father, always involved in school activities, coaching Jack's Little League baseball team, and never missing Emma's bedtime stories. I always felt incredibly lucky to be part of such a loving and close-knit family. The first signs of trouble appeared when I became pregnant with our second child. The pregnancy was planned and wanted, and at first, George seemed just as excited as he had been when we were expecting Mason. But as time passed, I began to notice subtle changes in his behavior. George started working longer hours, often not coming home until after the children were already asleep. When I asked about these extended absences, he explained that he was pursuing a promotion that could bring better financial stability for our increasingly large family. The explanation sounded reasonable, and I tried to support him, even though I found myself growing more and more exhausted as I had to shoulder more of the household and childcare responsibilities on my own. The late work nights were soon joined by weekend disappearances that George claimed were due to networking events and client meetings. Once again, these explanations seemed plausible given his ambitious career goals, but I could not shake the feeling that something fundamental was changing in our relationship. George seemed distracted and distant even when he was physically present, often spending entire evenings glued to his phone or laptop instead of talking to me or the children. Most troubling of all was George's growing irritability and impatience with the kids. The man who once had endless patience for Jack's struggles with math homework now snapped at small mistakes. The father who had never missed a single one of Emma's dance recitals suddenly found excuses to avoid school events. Even his relationship with Mason, once known for its playful affection, became tense and stiff. I tried many times to address these changes through gentle conversations and direct confrontation, but George consistently deflected or blamed me. He accused me of being demanding and needy, of not understanding the pressure of his work, and of expecting too much from him as a husband and a father. Those accusations cut especially deep, and my sense of insecurity kept growing. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in November, after George missed yet another important family event, the school play where Emma had been cast in the lead role in The Little Princess. I went alone, making excuses for George's absence to the other parents while watching Emma's face fall every time she glanced toward the empty seat where her father should have been sitting. When George came home after 10 that night, saying he had an urgent client matter and had to stay at the office, I decided we needed to have a serious conversation about the direction our marriage was heading. I had spent the entire evening after Emma's play thinking about the promises we had made to each other and to the children, and I no longer wanted to accept George's growing absence from our family life. "George, we need to talk," I said when he walked through the front door, his tie loosened and his expression already defensive. "Not tonight, Lauren," he replied, without looking at me, heading straight for the fridge and pulling out a beer. "I've had a long day, and I'm exhausted." "You've been busy a lot lately," I said, trying to keep my voice calm even as frustration rose inside me. "Emma had her play tonight. She did amazing, but she kept looking for you in the crowd." George clenched his jaw as he took a long pull from his beer. "I told you I had urgent work at the office. This is real life, Lauren. It doesn't always revolve around school plays or soccer games." The dismissive tone in his voice lit a fire in my chest. This isn't just about school plays or soccer games, George. This is your children's lives. These are the moments that matter to them, the memories they'll carry forever. Don't lecture me about my kids, George snapped, his voice rising enough that I glanced toward the upstairs bedrooms, hoping he wouldn't wake them. I work my ass off to support this family. Everything I do is for them. Providing isn't just about money, I shot back, my voice growing stronger. It's about being present, being involved, being the father they need. When was the last time you had a real conversation with Jack? When was the last time you read Emma a bedtime story? When was the last time you actually played with Mason? George slammed the beer bottle down on the kitchen counter, hard enough to make me flinch. I'm sick of your constant nagging, he said, his voice cold and filled with a contempt I had never heard from him before. I'm sick of you acting like you know what's best for everyone. You have no idea what I'm dealing with, what I've lost, what I've sacrificed. Then tell me, I pleaded, taking a step toward him despite the anger radiating off his body. Help me understand what's happening to us. We're supposed to be partners, George. We used to support each other. Now you can't even stand to be in the same room with me and the kids. George's face twisted with pain and rage, as if it were coming from some deep, toxic place inside him. You want to know what's wrong? He asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You want to know what I think about when I look at this perfect little family you've built? I nodded, even though something in the sound of his voice made my stomach tighten with fear. I think about Vanessa, George continued, his words hitting me like blows. I think about the woman who should be standing here instead of you. I think about how she would handle this pregnancy, how she would take care of Jack and Emma, how she would make this house into a real home instead of some cheap imitation. Those words were cruel enough, but George still did not stop. Everything burst open, and years of bottled-up resentment and grief came rushing out, pouring like a flood of accusations and comparisons, destroying everything Lauren had ever thought she knew about their marriage. Do you know what the truth is, Lauren? George said, his voice growing louder and more poisonous with each word. You are only half the woman Vanessa was. You try your best to replace her, but you will never measure up. You will never be what Jack and Emma truly need, and you will never be the woman I truly want. I felt those words like a physical blow, every syllable aimed to wound and destroy. But George still did not stop. The final strike was already falling, the words that would haunt me for months afterward and change our marriage forever. I wish you would just disappear so she could come back, George said, his eyes cold and calculating as he watched the impact of his words on Lauren's face. Sometimes I think how much better my life would be if Vanessa were still here, and you had never existed. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood frozen in the kitchen, the room where I had cooked thousands of meals for the family, where I had helped the children with their homework and kissed their scraped knees, where I had imagined growing old with the man who had just told me he wished I would vanish, so his first wife, who had abandoned him, could return. The life I had built, the identity I had formed as a wife and a mother, the love I had given and received, all of it collapsed around me in just those few horrific sentences. When I finally found my voice again, it was only a whisper. How could you say that to me? How could you say that about the mother of your children? George's expression did not soften. It only grew harder when he saw the devastation his words had caused. Because it's the truth, he said simply, and maybe it's time both of us faced it. The conversation could have ended there, with me retreating to nurse my emotional wounds and George continuing his campaign of emotional destruction. But something inside me refused to accept that this was the ending of my story. Maybe it was the thought of Jack and Emma sleeping upstairs, trusting that the adults in their lives would protect and care for them. Maybe it was the life growing inside me, innocent of the poisonous forces that had infected my marriage. Or maybe it was simply the realization that I deserved better than to be destroyed by a man who had forgotten how to love anything except his own pain. I want you to leave, Lauren said, my voice growing steadier with each word. I want you to pack your things and get out of this house tonight. George laughed, a bitter laugh with no humor in it. This is my house, Lauren. These are my children. You can't throw me out just because I told you truths you didn't want to hear. These are our children, I corrected, emphasizing the word our. And they deserve better than to live with a father so full of hatred that he wishes their mother were dead. You are not their mother, George said, pulling out the card he clearly thought was his trump card. You're just the woman I married because I was lonely, and they needed someone to take care of them. Don't confuse convenience with love. Those words were meant to crush me, and for a moment they almost did. But as I stood there, absorbing the full cruelty of George, I realized that his attacks on me were never truly about me at all. They were about his own guilt, his own unhealed grief, his own failure to move past the tragedy that had shaped his life for so many years. You're right about one thing, I said, my voice turning so steely it surprised both of us. I'm not Vanessa. I didn't abandon my husband and small children to run after another man, and I never wanted to replace her in Jack and Emma's hearts. What I wanted was to love them, care for them, and help them build a happy life. I saw the anger flare in George's eyes. I took a breath, gathering the strength for the words I knew would be the most important I had ever spoken. But if you think that means I will stand here and let you abuse me because you can't deal with your own pain, you're wrong. And if you think I will let you hurt these children because you're too selfish and broken to be the father they need, then you are even more wrong. George's confident smile faltered slightly as he began to realize this conversation was not going according to his script. And exactly what do you think you're threatening, Lauren? I'm not threatening anything, Lauren replied calmly. I'm telling you what is going to happen. Tomorrow morning, I will take my children and leave. You can keep your house, your memories, and your bitter, twisted version of love, but you can't have us anymore. Act 5. That night, after George finally stormed out of the house with threats about lawyers and custody battles, I sat alone in the bedroom and planned the hardest thing I had ever had to do. I was 6 months pregnant, emotionally shattered, and about to become a single mother of 2 children, one of whom had not even been born yet. The practical challenges ahead felt unbearable, but the other option, continuing to hold together a marriage that had become toxic and destructive, was unimaginable. The next morning, I was suddenly busy with a series of actions that, just 24 hours earlier, would have seemed impossible. While George went to work, probably expecting to come home to a wife who had caved in under his threats and ultimatums, I was quietly dismantling the life we had built together and preparing to rebuild it on my own terms. I started with the simplest thing, the phone George had left on the kitchen table, just like every rushed morning when he went to work. Sometimes he left it face down like that, as if confidently declaring that I was the kind of wife who would never snoop through her husband's phone. Before, he was right. I trusted him so completely that even if a notification popped up with the name Vanessa, I would tell myself it was just a coincidence, that their story was long over and belonged to the past. This morning, I no longer had the luxury of that faith. I picked up the phone, unlocked it with the code I knew by heart, the birthdays of Jack and Emma, and went straight to the messages. What appeared before my eyes was not the short, cold exchanges of 2 adults dealing with the aftermath of an old marriage. It was an entire private story they had been writing behind my back. I scrolled higher, past strings of laughing emojis, red hearts, images of 2 wine glasses clinking together, a photo taken from a hotel room overlooking the ocean, the hazy horizon in the distance, and Vanessa's message, "This place is just like the first time we ran away together, do you remember?" Beneath it was George's reply, "I've never forgotten." I began screenshotting everything, every conversation thread, every photo, every line I used to make excuses not to look at too closely. Now, every tap of the screenshot button was a cut, sharp, and clear-headed. I searched by dates and discovered that the weekends George said he had to attend client meetings matched perfectly with their messages. I captured it all, every image, every word, saving it into a new folder on my own phone, simply named Vanessa. Each image was a piece of evidence, but also a confirmation of my own blindness all this time. When there was nothing left to capture, I put the phone back exactly where it had been, face down, as if it had never been touched. My heart was still racing, but a thin layer of ice was forming around it, making everything terrifyingly clear and orderly. I was no longer crying. I was only thinking about the next step: money, the house, the things that belonged to me before I ever stepped into George's life, and the things I had brought into this family that he had always taken for granted. He could stand in the kitchen and declare that I was just convenience, but the numbers in a bank account never lie. I changed my clothes, tied my hair into a tight knot, grabbed my bag and the bank documents I always kept neatly filed in the drawer of my small home office. Before leaving, I glanced upstairs, where the children were still sleeping, their hair messy on their pillows, their faces relaxed in dreams, unaware that their world was about to change. Then I closed the door, locked it, and drove to the bank where George and I had sat so many times signing papers and talking about the future of our family. At the counter, I offered the clerk a polite smile and told her I wanted to open a separate account in my own name and transfer into it a sum from the joint account, exactly half of what we had saved. My hands did not shake, my voice was steady, as if I were doing something completely ordinary, like paying the children's school fees or making a car loan payment. When she asked for the reason, I shrugged and said, I want to split some of it off for easier management, in case there's an emergency involving the kids while my husband is traveling for work. It wasn't completely a lie. I really was preparing for an emergency. It was just far bigger than anything she could imagine. My next stop was a self-storage facility about 30 minutes' drive from our house. I had searched for it online before dawn. Lying in the dark, listening to the children's steady breathing, my fingers moving across my phone screen as I chose a well-reviewed place that rented by the month. The morning manager looked slightly surprised when a pregnant woman with neatly tied hair, an oversized sweater, and jeans walked in and asked to rent a small unit, paying 3 months cash up front. I signed the contract, received the padlock and key, listened as he briefly explained the hours and rules. I nodded, thanked him, and then stood alone in the empty concrete space, feeling as though I had just laid the first brick of another life. Over the next few hours, I went back and forth between the house and the storage unit 3 times, moving like a ghost through my own life. I opened the old wooden cabinet in the bedroom, where I kept the small box of my grandmother's inheritance, the faded silk scarf, the antique white gold jewelry set, the handwritten letters she had sent me when I was studying to be a nurse. Everything was carefully wrapped and placed into cardboard boxes. I took down the paintings I had bought with my own salary in my early working years, before I had ever met George, from the living room walls. I gathered the photo albums from my childhood, the pictures of me in my nursing uniform on graduation day, the moments where George did not exist at all. Those things were mine, completely and absolutely. He had no right to touch them, just as he had no right to decide whether they would be kept or sold to split the assets. In the afternoon, as I sat alone at the dining table with my laptop open in front of me, I traced through the hotel booking confirmation emails George thought he had erased without a trace. He had forgotten one thing. Electronic credit card statements always leave their own separate trail. I logged into our joint bank account, scrolled through the transaction history, and saw repeated charges at the same highway motel, a small suburban restaurant we had never once gone to together. Every charge matched the exact times George had claimed he had to go on urgent business trips or weekend conferences. I wrote down the dates, times, and amounts, downloaded the detailed transaction records. Hidden among those rows of numbers, I also found smaller purchases, movie tickets, ice cream, toys, at the shopping center near Vanessa's new neighborhood. As the sun began to set, Pale orange light spilled into the living room, and the house looked outwardly peaceful as always. Mason played with building blocks on the rug. Jack and Emma worked on their homework at the dining table. The soft scratch of pencils on paper mixing with the quiet music I played low in the kitchen. From outside, if anyone had been looking in, they would have seen nothing but an ordinary family afternoon. No one would have known that inside my computer, inside my phone, inside the self-storage unit half an hour away, a new version of my life was being assembled piece by piece, silent, methodical, and unforgiving. The next morning, I woke before the alarm went off. Pale light just slipping through the curtains, and in the first few seconds, my mind tried to cling to the old routine, checking whether George was back, wondering where he slept last night. Then the memory of that Tuesday night rushed in of the words he said about wishing I would disappear so Vanessa could come back. I lay there for a few breaths longer, one hand resting on my belly. The baby stirred slightly, a clear reminder that I no longer had the right to be weak. George was not in the bedroom. He had come back to the house late the night before, banged on the door, shouted through the closed wood that I was overreacting, that we needed to sit down and talk like adults, that for the sake of the children, I should swallow my pride. I didn't open the door. In the end, he threw out a few vague threats about how he would talk to his lawyer, then went downstairs. I slid out of bed and went into the bathroom with the feeling that I was operating someone else's body. Every movement was precise, mechanical, brushing my teeth, washing my face, tying my hair, applying moisturizer. I took the only navy blue suit I owned from the closet, the one I had bought a few years ago for my nursing supervisor interview, the outfit that made me look grown-up, sharp, and hard to shake. I did my makeup more carefully than usual, covered the dark circles, put on a deep shade of lipstick that sharpened my features. When I looked up at the mirror, the woman staring back at me was not Lauren, who lowered her voice whenever George got angry, not the woman with trembling tears in the kitchen on Tuesday night. She looked calm, professional, her eyes cold but clear, hiding layers of rage and grief behind an exterior that felt almost impenetrable. Good. That was the face I needed to carry with me today. I drove to the lawyer's office. The city was waking up, neighbors, walking their dogs, children with backpacks waiting for the bus shops, opening their doors, pulling up shutters, arranging pastries behind glass displays. It felt strange to realize that for them, this was just another ordinary morning. For me, this was the day my marriage officially shifted from something rotting quietly in silence into a thick legal file with a case number and a red stamp. The law office sat in a modest red brick building near the center of town, a place we passed every week without me ever imagining I would walk inside. The small sign by the door read Rachel Myers, family and marriage attorney. I had spoken to her on the phone the night before. Rachel was waiting for me in a small conference room with a window facing the main street, neat stacks of papers arranged on the table, bookmarked with pink sticky notes. They looked exactly like the patient care plans I wrote every day, goals, progress, interventions. The only difference was that this time the patient was my marriage, and our task was to amputate it before it continued poisoning the children. Rachel greeted me with a firm handshake, her eyes quickly assessing my face, as if measuring whether I was truly ready to go all the way. We will file the divorce petition and the emergency restraining order at the same time. I want to make sure that the moment George receives the papers, he cannot come back here and unload his rage on you and the kids. She handed me each file one by one, explaining everything carefully. The divorce petition detailed the history of the marriage. It listed the times he missed the children's events. It recorded my attempts to talk the times I was labeled nagging, not understanding pressure, and unreasonably demanding. Attached were the printed copies of the messages between George and Vanessa that I had captured, everything numbered, clearly annotated. The part that made my breath catch was the emergency restraining order. Rachel was blunt. Emotional abuse is harder to prove than physical violence, but in your case, we have a strong pattern. You are 6 months pregnant, physically vulnerable, and he has repeatedly made statements that can be considered indirect threats to your mental safety. She pointed to the statement we had prepared. explaining that if the judge granted the order, that same day George would be required to leave the house immediately, stay outside a defined distance from me and the children, and have no direct contact by phone or text, only through attorneys. He could be granted visitation with the children, but it would be supervised at a neutral location until a formal hearing took place. I know this is a big step, Rachel said, but based on what you told me about his irritability with the kids, about what he said that night, and about secretly taking Jack and Emma to see Vanessa, without telling you, I do not believe he is placing the children's stability as his top priority. This order is not revenge, it is a protective barrier. I took the pen, looked down at the dense printed lines bearing my name, and signed each marked spot with a steadiness that surprised me. I did not cry. My heart was pounding, but the pressure that had been crushing my chest for months suddenly eased a little. Rachel watched me, as if waiting to see whether I would change my mind at the last second, then nodded and gathered the files. We'll file electronically before noon, she said. I've arranged for the process server to deliver the papers to George at his office at 2:30 this afternoon. There will be plenty of coworkers around. It will be harder for him to explode or try to rush back home before the order takes effect. The way she talked about timing strategy reminded me of emergency cases. Every minute matters, and if arranged correctly, it can save a life. Here, the life in question was mine and my children's. The time that followed moved both fast and slow. At 11:58, Rachel sent a short text filed. From this point on, everything is official. At 2:15, another message came in. The process server is on his way to your husband's company parking lot. Ready? I stared at the numbers on the screen, took a deep breath, and simply replied, Ready. At 2:30, my phone began to vibrate. The name George flashed one call after another like waves crashing against a cliff. I looked at the screen without touching it. I imagined him receiving the envelope at work, opening it, reading the words, petition for divorce and temporary restraining order. The confusion, the shock, then the anger rising, but with nowhere to explode the way it always did in my kitchen. After the fifth call, I blocked his number. Immediately, message notifications from George's sister Megan popped up then from his close friend. I muted everything and let it sit there. From today on, for now, all of it was under my control. The locksmith arrived in the early afternoon, right on schedule. I stood on the porch, watching him remove each old lock and replace it with bright new ones. They clicked softly when he tested them, and that small sound rang louder to me than George's shouting 2 nights earlier. I updated the alarm codes and the camera system passwords for the cameras I had installed that very morning, small hidden eyes tucked into ceiling corners, pointed at the front door, the back door, the garage. If George tried to sneak back after work, if he tried to pound on the door, everything would be recorded. This was no longer his house, untouchable and sacred. This was my shelter and the children's. And from now on, anyone who wanted to come in would need my permission. I had barely had time to take in that feeling when the doorbell rang rapid and insistent. Through the phone screen linked to the camera, I saw George's parents on the porch, Robert and Diane, with an expression I knew well fueled by outrage and by a version of the story told by their son. Behind them, I spotted Megan and one of George's close friends, Mark, standing off in the yard as backup. I thought for a second, then unlocked the door, but only opened it a crack, positioning myself between the doorway and the threshold. I did not invite anyone inside. That was the first boundary. What do you think you're doing? Lauren Robert burst out, almost immediately, his voice so loud the neighbors could probably hear it from inside their homes. Why did you send someone to his workplace to serve divorce papers? Why did you ask for a restraining order? Do you have any idea what you're doing to George's career? Diane stood beside him, eyes already red, hands trembling as she clutched her purse. Child, there must be some misunderstanding here, she pleaded. George said you lost your temper that night, said cruel things, and now you're throwing him out and banning him from seeing the kids. You can't do something like this over one argument. Every married couple fights. I listened to them as if watching a play whose lines I already knew by heart. I knew exactly what George had told them, that I was too sensitive, that I turned everything into a tragedy, that he had only misspoken in a moment of anger, that somehow I was the one who had made him into a victim. I inhaled slowly and kept my voice calm. I didn't ask for a restraining order because of an argument I said. I asked for it because my husband told me in my kitchen, while I was pregnant, that he wished I would disappear so his ex-wife could come back, and because he had been secretly meeting Vanessa, going to hotels with her, while still living in this house, eating the food I cooked, letting me take care of his children. Robert tried to interrupt me, but I raised my hand to stop him. If you came here to talk like adults, we can continue. But if you came just to shout at me based on whatever George told you, then I will close the door right now. Diane rushed in, her voice flustered and tinged with anger. George said, he said Vanessa only wanted to see the kids a little, that you wouldn't allow it, so he had to hide it. She hadn't even finished the sentence when I pulled out my phone, opened the Vanessa folder, selected a few random photos and messages, and held the screen up in front of them. Vanessa standing in a hotel lobby in a tight dress. George taking the photo from behind. Diane covered her mouth. Robert took the phone, his eyes scanning each line as the color literally drained from his face. In that moment, they were no longer my angry in-laws attacking me, but two aging parents realizing their son was not the man they had believed him to be. They stood in silence for a long time. Finally, Robert handed the phone back and took a step away. George, he didn't tell us any of this, he stammered. I shrugged. I guess it wasn't convenient. They left without another word, their posture collapsed, heads bowed like people walking away from a funeral. I closed the door, locked it carefully, and leaned my back against the wood for a long moment, before realizing that I was shaking not from fear, but from the feeling of having just torn down a curtain of lies that had covered every relationship around me. That evening, Diane called again. I looked at her name on the screen, hesitated for a few seconds, then answered. Her voice was much smaller now, hoarse from crying. I'm sorry, Lauren, she said directly. I thought it was just a mistake. I didn't know he had gone this far. I didn't know he would dare say those things to you while you're pregnant. She paused, sobbing. I can't defend him anymore. But if there's anything I can do to help you and the children. I listened to her, felt the genuine pain in her voice, but something inside me had already closed. I thanked her. We ended the call with a few polite words, with none of the warmth of the times she used to hug me in the kitchen in years past. I knew from here on my relationship with George's family would never return to what it had been, and I also knew with absolute clarity that there was nothing like before left that was worth holding on to anymore. In the days that followed, my phone turned into a kind of loudspeaker for the entire town of Millfield. George's friends, co-workers, and old acquaintances took turns texting and calling. Some scolded me for overreacting. Some begged me to think about the children. Some advised me to talk to George one more time and not let the lawyers manipulate me. What hurt the most was that not a single one of them asked me what had actually happened in that dark kitchen on Tuesday night. No one asked, what did he say to you? You're pregnant? Are you okay? They only knew the version George told them, that his wife had been thrown out of control by pregnancy hormones, that I wanted to cut him off from his children just because he was still talking to their mother. I answered only one person, Rachel, by forwarding those messages to her, so she could add them to the case file as proof that George was trying to control the narrative through others. The rest I left unanswered. I no longer felt the need to explain myself to every single person. My silence was a choice, and it was also a kind of weapon. It forced them either to accept that they did not know the whole truth, or to face the possibility that they were standing on the wrong side. The hardest part for me was explaining things to Jack and Emma. Jack, now old enough to sense the seriousness of what was happening, asked the question I had been dreading. Are you and Dad getting divorced? I looked into my children's faces and chose honesty over false comfort. Mom doesn't know yet, sweetheart. I hope we can work things out peacefully, but right now, we need to focus on keeping our family safe and healthy. Emma, 10 years old, still young enough to believe that adult problems can always be fixed, wrapped her arms around my neck. "I don't want Mom and Dad to fight anymore," she whispered. "I just want us to be happy like before." The innocence and trust in Emma's voice almost shattered my resolve. How could I explain to a child that sometimes love alone is not enough? That sometimes the very people we trust to protect us are the ones who hurt us the most? "I want that too, sweetheart," I said, holding Emma tight while reaching my other arm out to pull Jack and 6-year-old Mason close. "More than anything, I want us to be happy, safe, and together. That's why we're doing this, to protect our family and give ourselves the best chance to heal." The legal battle that followed unfolded just as brutally as the lawyer had predicted. George hired an expensive attorney and launched a campaign to paint me as an unstable woman who had manipulated him throughout his period of grief and was now using his children as weapons in a hateful divorce. He claimed that I was turning the kids against him as proof that I was unfit to be a mother and that his comments about Vanessa had been taken out of context. But George underestimated both my resolve and the strength of the case against him. In the weeks that followed, a picture emerged of a man who had been shirking his family responsibilities long before our final confrontation. School records showed his absences from parent meetings and school events. The printed message threads were submitted as evidence. Hotel rendezvous, plans to start over with Vanessa. I watched George's face grow tighter and tighter, his hands clasped together until his knuckles turned white, while Ellison sat beside him with a stone-cold expression. Then it was George's turn. He took the stand with a strained face, fists clenched, eyes avoiding mine. His lawyer guided him through the script. George said he had been shocked by Vanessa's return, that he had tried to do the right thing, but was being pulled between two sides, that the words in the messages were mere emotional venting, and never meant that he intended to leave his wife and children. He claimed he never truly wished I would disappear, that he had simply said it in anger, that I had not given him a chance to explain, and that my decision to take the children and leave proved I was emotionally unstable and willing to sever the father-child bond. If I had not had all that evidence, there might have been a moment when I would have wavered at that almost pitiful tone. But I had seen the words he sent Vanessa. I had seen how he planned to have it both ways while I broke my back caring for his children every day. The judge questioned him directly, without detours. "Mr. Harrison, if you claim you were shocked by Ms. Vanessa's proposal to resume a relationship, why do you have a months-long history of messages and hotel receipts with her? Why did you take the two children to see their biological mother multiple times without notifying the person the law currently recognizes as their mother?" George stammered that they were just quick visits, that he didn't want to hurt Lauren, that he believed he was doing what was best for the children. The more he spoke, the deeper he slid into the contradictions of his own story. If everything was innocent, why hide it? If Vanessa was such a good mother as he claimed, why not dare to tell me? The judge could not hide a weary frown as she listened to him struggle. The most damaging testimony of all came from Jack and Emma. When interviewed by a court-appointed child psychologist, both children described a father who had grown increasingly distant and angry, especially after learning that I was pregnant. They spoke of being afraid of his temper, confused by his absences, and of always wanting to protect their stepmother, whom both of them consistently called Mom. And then, as if some bad screenwriter had decided to inject extra drama into an already heavy scene, the courtroom door opened midway through the hearing. Vanessa walked in, late. She wore a tight dress completely inappropriate for court, her 7-month pregnant belly clearly visible. She sat down in the row behind George, fidgeting, occasionally whispering to a companion. I forced my gaze to stay fixed on the judge, but I could still feel her presence like a knife pressed close to my back. The hearing continued for a few more minutes, more questions about finances, work hours, asset division, until Vanessa suddenly lost control. She shot to her feet, her sharp voice slicing through the room's tense quiet. "This is ridiculous! She's punishing George just because he wants a real family. Lauren always knew what he wanted. She's just using the pregnancy and the kids to trap him. With each sentence, her face flushed deeper red, her finger pointing straight at me as if I were the defendant in the trial of her life. She began ranting about the rights of the biological mother, about how I had stolen her children, about how I was using the restraining order to strip the kids of their chance to see their real mother. The judge's gavel slammed down on the bench, sharp and decisive, silencing the entire room. Her voice cut through the air like steel. Ms. Vanessa, this is a formal court proceeding. You are not a party to this case. You will be silent immediately, or I will order you removed from the courtroom. But Vanessa did not stop, still trying to shout that. Everyone is misunderstanding, that I only want to help George have the life he deserves. Two court officers stepped toward her, their expressions making it clear they had no intention of debating. The judge turned fully to Vanessa, her voice dropping another degree colder. You have already appeared more than enough in this file as an individual involved in deception and in causing emotional harm to Mrs. Harrison. Now you continue to demonstrate a lack of respect for even the most basic legal procedure. I hereby extend the current restraining order. You are strictly prohibited from contacting Mrs. Harrison and her children, directly or indirectly, for 6 months. You are also forbidden from appearing at their home or workplace. If you utter one more word, I will hold you in contempt of court. Vanessa's mouth fell open, her lips trembling. But before she could speak again, the officers gently but firmly took hold of her arms and escorted her out. The door closed behind them, the sound of her high heels fading down the tiled hallway. George closed his eyes for a brief moment, one hand rising to pinch the bridge of his nose, the expression of a man who had just realized the ship he had been clinging to for so long was sinking right in front of him. Rachel glanced at me, the corner of her mouth lifting into a very small smile, the smile of someone who had just watched the opposing side shatter its own argument with its own hands. The court adjourned for 15 minutes so the judge could review the entire file one final time. Rachel and I sat in the hallway, speaking very little. I watched other people passing by. Some couples, some parents. Faces worn with the same kind of exhaustion as ours, each carrying their own version of a story. In that moment, I realized that no matter how many painful details my story held, it was still just one of countless fragments of what people call family. When we returned to the courtroom, the judge was ready. She read her decision slowly, item by item. The temporary restraining order was officially extended for another 6 months and made effective against both George and Vanessa. George was prohibited from coming near me, and the children, within a defined distance, except when permitted by court order for supervised visitation. I was granted full custody of all 3 children. The family home was ordered to be sold, and the proceeds divided, with a temporary property division clearly favoring me, while George still received enough to start over, perhaps with Vanessa and their unborn child. The legal victories, however satisfying they seemed, were only the beginning of my real challenges. I was now a single mother of 3 children, one of whom I was still carrying, with no family nearby and a limited support system. Jack struggled the most with the change. As the eldest, he remembered more of his life before I entered the family, and George's abandonment reawakened the abandonment wounds he had first experienced after his mother left. He was angry at his father, yet burdened by guilt over the loyalty he felt toward the woman who had raised him for more than half his life. Emma coped by pouring all her energy into school and activities, earning straight A's and excelling in dance with an intensity that worried me. She seemed determined to become perfect, as if excellence could somehow prevent any more loss from happening to her family. Mason, too young to fully understand what had happened, struggled with the absence of the father he adored and the tension that had marked the final months of what had once been a whole family. He began to have nightmares. The months after the divorce were marked by small victories and major challenges. I found work at a local hospital with a flexible schedule and good benefits. I connected with other single mothers through my children's school and community activities, building a support network that helped fill the gaps left by their fractured family structure. Most importantly, I sought counseling for myself and the children, recognizing that the emotional trauma from George's abuse and abandonment required professional support to be truly overcome and healed. The therapy sessions were difficult but essential, giving all of us the tools to understand and cope with our experiences. My fourth child, a daughter, Grace, was born on a snowy morning while Jack, Emma, and Mason waited anxiously in the hospital waiting room. Her arrival was both an ending and a beginning for my marriage to George. George's supervised visits grew increasingly rare as he and his ex-wife moved to another state and began building a family of their own. His contact with Jack, Emma, and Mason was reduced to birthday cards and Christmas gifts sent without any accompanying phone calls or personal messages. Vanessa, on the other hand, was completely different. She entirely ignored the existence of the two children, claiming that they had betrayed her. The story of my marriage to George and its aftermath became a cautionary tale for our former friends and neighbors, but for me, it came to represent something far more complex and ultimately more hopeful. It was the story of a woman who discovered her own strength in the face of emotional abuse, who chose her children's well-being over social expectations and financial security, and who rebuilt a life that was smaller in some ways, yet infinitely richer in the ways that truly mattered.